A lot has happened with OpenAI recently on both the technological front, and I think that's generally all to the good, but also on the corporate drama front. And that has a lot of people, including Elon Musk and honestly me, concerned about the future not just of OpenAI, but of humanity itself. Let's take a look. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. So today I want to talk about OpenAI and in particular Sam Altman as the CEO and kind of, figurehead leader of OpenAI, whatever you want to call it. And this is a story that's been building for quite a while, and certainly it came to a head around Thanksgiving last year, November of 2023, when he was fired for a whopping 48 hours, maybe 72 hours, and then rehired. He was basically fired on a Friday and rehired before Monday. So it was like one crazy weekend of drama. But that drama just brought to a head things that have been going on for quite a while. A super brief history of OpenAI: Elon Musk and Sam Altman started talking, I believe, back in 2015. They created the company with Ilya Sutskever, who is going to become a player here in just 1 second. And then the company was founded to be OpenAI. The whole point was they were going to open source everything. It was all going to be available. It was going to be a research lab. Things have clearly gone a very, very different direction since then. The joke now is OpenAI equals closed AI. It's basically like war is peace, freedom is slavery, that kind of a thing, like 1984 kind of double speak. And during that time, a lot of people, including Elon Musk, have become very, very concerned about Sam Altman, and they believe that he's being very duplicitous and essentially trying to take over the world with AI. But very interestingly, if you look at Sam Altman's behavior and his personality, he reads as very honest and non-duplicitous. And I've studied an emotional physical system called bioenergetics, which is definitely not mainstream psychology, but in my experience, as well as my ex-wife's, who specializes in character acting and uses this and other techniques professionally, I found it to be a really useful tool to determine personality types. As these screen grabs show, bioenergetics contains 5 main body psychology types, and the most dangerous of them is what was formerly termed psychopathic, but due to the negative connotations, has been renamed to controller/leader or aggressive. Generally, there are 2 types of the controller, the bullying one and the seducing one, and my concern is that even though I personally read Sam Altman as honest and forthright, he could be a seducing controller type, which is a personality type that many of the biggest heroes and villains in history have shared. Of course, take this all with a grain of salt, but I always go back to thinking about the seducing controller personality type when I watch interviews with Sam. Like I said, I personally read Sam as honest and forthright, but let's just say I keep a weather eye out for signs that this might not be true. And after all of this lovely preamble, Sam, if you or anyone on the OpenAI team would like to have a chat, I would be honored, totally honored. I promise I will ask hard questions, but I'll also be totally fair, and I will enjoy hearing your thoughts on the future direction of OpenAI and the drive towards AGI and ASI. All right, this might be the worst invitation ever, but at least you know where I stand. So anyway, for me, Sam reads as an open and honest person, and it's super interesting he reads that way to me because if he's not, there's something serious going on, and he's really good at playing the game. But while he reads very open and honest to me, there are clearly people at OpenAI, or used to be at OpenAI, who feel really differently about that. The failed Thanksgiving coup led by Ilya Sutskever, and by the way, when you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die, and that's essentially what Ilya did. Not physically, of course, but in terms of his career at OpenAI. And you can see his resignation here from a couple of days ago, where he says, after almost a decade, I've made a decision to leave OpenAI. The company's trajectory has been nothing short of miraculous, and I'm confident OpenAI will build AGI that is both safe and beneficial under the leadership of these folks, and now under the excellent leadership of Jacob Pachoki. It was an honor and a privilege to have worked together, and I will miss everyone dearly. So long, and thanks for all the fishes. So long, and thanks for everything. I'm excited for what comes next, a project that is personally meaningful to me, about which I will share details in due time. And also, Ilya, if you want to ever come on the show, you are absolutely welcome as well. And while Ilya's role was never particularly defined in this particular capacity, it seems like he was very much involved in the safety and alignment team. That is the group of people trying to make sure that as OpenAI drives towards artificial general intelligence, that they're actually doing it in a safe manner, and that the AGI will eventually align with humanity's best interests, and that it's being done in the safest possible manner at the expense of speed and things like that. And the counter argument that people are claiming, and of course Ilya doesn't really say anything here, it's very, very sweet and all that stuff, and then Sam writes back something and says, like, it was great working with you, I'll really miss you, you're one of the geniuses. So really warm stuff on the surface, it sounds great and all that, but underneath it all, the problem is that it sounds like the alignment and safety team did not get the adequate resources and were being shoved to the side in order for shiny new objects, as Jan Leike says. And speaking of Jan, and some people say Jan, and I'm not exactly sure, so I apologize if I'm saying your name incorrectly. But anyway, he on May 17th, just a couple of days after Ilya, says, "Yesterday was my last day as head of alignment, super alignment lead, and executive at OpenAI." So he is clearly alignment guy, and he was in charge of the whole team. And then he kind of goes on, "OpenAI must become a safety-first AGI company. To all OpenAI employees, I want to say, learn to feel the AGI, act with the gravitas appropriate for what you're building. I believe you can ship the cultural change that's needed. I'm counting on you. The world is counting on you. OpenAI heart." And in other posts, Jan talks about how OpenAI has not given the alignment team the compute resources and everything else that they need. So he's clearly much more hardcore about the fact that he quit because OpenAI was not putting their money where their mouths are, I guess. Well, there's a bad metaphor for that. But anyway, they were not giving the alignment team enough resources, enough respect, enough credence as they build these new products out. So something happened back in November that caused this coup, and we're still seeing the fallout of that like 6 months later, and clearly the fallout is pretty major, and it looks like things may have shifted radically away from safety and alignment. And of course, if that's true, that could be very, very dangerous. And then one more post here from Sam himself in regards to the recent stuff about how OpenAI handles equity. There have been rumors and suggestions, and actually I think proof from actual documents, that OpenAI had non-disparagement clauses, which means that people could lose their non-vested equity, their shares in OpenAI if they said something bad about OpenAI, particularly after they left. And so he's trying to clarify that here. He says, "We have never clawed back anyone's vested equity, nor will we do that if people do not sign a separation agreement or don't agree to a non-disparagement agreement. Vested equity is vested equity, full stop. There was a provision about the potential equity cancellation in our previous exit documents. Although we never clawed anything back, it should never have been something we had in any documents or communication. This is on me and one of the few times I've been genuinely embarrassed running OpenAI. I did not know this was happening and I should have. The team was already in the process of fixing the standard exit paperwork over the past month or so. If any former employee who signed one of these old agreements is worried about it, they can contact me and we'll fix that too. Very sorry about this." So again, if you read this sounds very, very open and everything, right? Sam sounds open. He's apologetic. He says, "This is on me. This is my fault. The buck stops here," etc. That certainly isn't someone who is belligerently like, "I am always right. You guys are always wrong. These people, screw them," all that kind of stuff. So Sam is being a good person, at least public facingly. Who knows what he thinks behind the scenes, but at least the way he writes, this sounds relatively reasonable. It's got his stylistic stamp on it with all the lowercase stuff and everything. So this doesn't sound like it's coming from some sort of corporate marketing person, public relations person doing this. This is probably Sam himself writing this and taking the time to write this. So this is an important matter. And again, this sounds very open and honest. So with all of that in mind, let's turn to something that was published on May 3rd. I've sat on this for a while because I didn't know exactly how to cover it, and so now I'm covering it. Anyway, reimagining secure infrastructure for advanced AI. OpenAI calls for an evolution in infrastructure security to protect advanced AI. I'm not going to read this entire document, although you will be able to see it on the screen, and I will leave a link to it in the description if you want to read it on your own. A few highlights here. Securing advanced AI systems will require an evolution in infrastructure security. We're sharing 6 security measures that we believe will complement the security controls of today and contribute to the protection of advanced AI. So 6 takeaways, as they say in this document. This is not signed by Sam Altman. In fact, it's not signed by anyone. It's just OpenAI. But certainly he had a lot to do with this and he certainly approved it. Model weights are merely files that must be decrypted and deployed in order to be used. And if the infrastructure and operations providing their availability are compromised, the model weights are liable to be stolen. Conventional security controls like network security monitoring and access controls can enable robust defenses. However, new approaches are needed to maximize protection while ensuring availability. So this is very much against open sourcing of model weights and things like that. And this plays into the regulatory capture hypothesis that the folks in the All In podcast kind of pepper Sam with in the section I'm going to show in just a minute. So the first of their key takeaways, and this is really, really kind of scary here, emerging encryption and hardware security technology like confidential computing offers the promise of protecting model weights and inference data by extending trusted computing primitives beyond the CPU host and into the AI accelerators themselves. Extending cryptographic protection to the hardware layer has the potential to achieve the following properties. And of course, you can read those properties. But the scary part here is that the idea, it sounds like OpenAI wants everybody's GPUs to be registered. Now, Sam will probably argue that that is only like Blackwell chips or H100s or something like that, very, very advanced chips that are not generally consumer facing. But you don't know that. Regulations have a tendency to be regulations, and they tend to be much broader than at first envisioned. So this could be the kind of thing where you have a little bit of spyware in everybody's computers, and that's rather terrifying. And at the very least, it sounds like it could be in data centers all over the world as well, and that's not great either. So again, as a way of protecting their model weights, which OpenAI is very, very scared about, don't want open source things like Llama and stuff like that. What they want is to use the hardware itself, the GPUs and everything, to be registered and only decrypt the weights of these models if they are registered and approved GPUs. And that's kind of a scary thing to be thinking about. Then they get into network isolation guarantees. That stuff actually is pretty reasonable, honestly, in my mind. Then they get into innovation in operational and physical security for data centers. And the concluding part of this is a little bit scary. Research areas may include advances in supply chain verification, remote kill switches to isolate the data center or wipe data in case of unauthorized access or suspected compromise, and tamper evidence systems that do the same. Now, this could be used against a potential AGI that was trying to escape or something, but it could also potentially be used against anyone. Let's say that the government gets in control of this, and that's the danger of regulatory capture, of course, is that the big players set up the regulations do what they do, and then the small players are just wiped out. They can't compete. And in this case, the small players or even other big players could simply have all of their data wiped by these compliant GPUs and compliant hardware, and that's a rather scary proposition. Next up, number 4, the key highlight here is AI infrastructure must be audited for and compliant with applicable security standards. So yes and no, it really depends on whether you're talking about the building of the airplane or the output of the airplane. They're going to talk about this in the All In podcast here in just a second. But the idea is, do you audit the airplane as it's being built externally from the government? Now, certainly Boeing and Airbus and stuff, they should audit it while it's being built. But in terms of the governmental regulations, the general thing has been you build the plane and then you get it tested, and the output of the plane, the actual finished airplane, is what's tested for safety, not the input parts. So it's a little bit unclear here what exactly they're going after, but the danger is that this could allow governmental oversight and insight into exactly what's going on inside these companies, and that sounds like really, really far overstepping of what government should do, especially considering that most of these people don't even understand this technology. So how are you going to do that? Next up, point 5 is AI for cyber defense, and I have to say I pretty much agree with this. I think it is a national security issue. You don't want these things, if it is deemed to be private information, you don't want other countries, other state entities to be hacking this. So defenders across the globe struggle to ingest and analyze signals needed to detect and respond to threats in their networks. And at OpenAI, we use our models, it sounds like currently, to analyze high volume and sensitive security telemetry that would otherwise be out of reach of our teams of human analysts. So interesting. I agree with the idea here, but it also sounds like they may have AI in place as a backdoor watching data happen right now, watching data flow across the internet. And that is a little bit scary as well, right? Speaking of overreach, that's like corporate overreach or potentially governmental overreach, because the two of them may be working together. And then finally, resilience, redundancy, and research, which makes really good sense because this is very much true and it's the way the internet works. There are no flawless systems, including the internet, and there is no perfect security, including the internet. Therefore, these controls must achieve resiliency by working together. And so, yes, I too believe in resiliency and redundancy, but I believe in that through open source. I think the deal is to give away as much of this stuff as possible, make it as widely available as possible. And therefore, of course, there's always an arms race between the white hats and the black hats, or whatever, the good guys and the bad guys. You're going to have that always, but what you want to do is arm everybody, arm the good guys with as much stuff as possible, and not predetermine who the good guys are. The danger of single companies or very small, oligarchic groups of companies deciding anything is the same danger that a totalitarian government has, and that is that they decide what's right, and even if they have the best intentions at heart, they can't possibly decide what's right for everyone. And even if this particular generation has the best intentions at heart, you just don't know what's going to happen with leadership change, and you don't know what will happen in the future. So in my opinion, you really want something that's distributed, non-centralized. You want something that is much more redundant, and OpenAI is talking about redundancy here, but they're talking about them being being redundant by having multiple server farms and things like that. A much better redundancy would be to have the weights all over the place, and then you can't kill them because they're just everywhere. So now I'm going to play about a 6 or 7 minute chunk from the All In podcast with Sam Altman. I will leave a link to that, like I said, in the description. It starts about 42 and a half minutes. So I'm just going to play the whole thing. You tell me what you think about Sam's responses in light of what we have just talked about.
What does it mean when people say regulate AI?
Totally.
Sam, what does that even mean?
And comment on California's new proposed regulations as well if you're up for it.
I'm concerned. I mean, there's so many proposed regulations, but
Yeah.
most of the ones I've seen on the California state things I'm concerned about. I also have a general fear of the states all doing this themselves. When people say regulate AI, I don't think they mean one thing. I think there's like some people are like ban the whole thing. Some people are like don't allow it to be open source, require it to be open source. The thing that I am personally most interested in is I think there will come. Look, I may be wrong about this. I will acknowledge that this is a forward-looking statement, and those are always dangerous to make. But I think there will come a time in the not super distant future, like, we're not talking like decades and decades from now, where the frontier AI systems are capable of causing significant global harm. And for those kinds of systems, in the same way we have like global oversight of nuclear weapons or synthetic bio or things that can really like have a very negative impact way beyond the realm of one country, I would like to see some sort of international agency that is looking at the most powerful systems and ensuring like reasonable safety testing. These things are not going to escape and recursively self-improve or whatever.
The criticism of this is that you have the resources to cozy up, to lobby, to be involved, and you've been very involved with politicians, and then startups, which you're also passionate about and invest in, are not going to have the ability to resource and deal with this, and that this regulatory capture, as per our friend, Bill Gurley did a great talk last year about it. So maybe you could address that head on. Do you feel
if the line were we're only going to look at models that are trained on computers that cost more than 10 billion or more than 100 billion or whatever dollars, I'd be fine with that. There'd be some line that'd be fine. And I don't think that puts any regulatory burden on startups.
So if you have like the nuclear raw material to make a nuclear bomb, like there's a small subset of people who have that. Therefore, you use the analogy of like a nuclear inspectors kind of situation.
Yeah,
I think that's interesting. Sachs, you have a question?
Well, Chamath, go ahead. You had a follow-up.
Can I say one more thing about that?
Of course.
I'd be super nervous about regulatory overreach here. I think we can get this wrong by doing way too much, or even a little too much. I think we can get this wrong by doing not enough. But I do think part of, we have seen regulatory overstepping or capture just get super bad in other areas. Also maybe nothing will happen. But I think it is part of our duty and our mission to like talk about what we believe is likely to happen and what it takes to get that right.
The challenge, Sam, is that we have statute that is meant to protect people, protect society at large. What we're creating, however, is statute that gives the government rights to go in and audit code, to audit business trade secrets. We've never seen that to this degree before. Basically, the California legislation that's proposed and some of the federal legislation that's been proposed basically requires the government to audit a model, to audit software, to audit and review the parameters and the weightings of the model. And then you need their check mark in order to deploy it for commercial or public use. And for me, it just feels like we're trying to rein in the government agencies for fear and because folks have a hard time understanding this and are scared about the implications of it, they want to control it. And because they want, and the only way to control it is to say, give me a right to audit before you can release it.
Yeah,
as
and
opposed
they're clueless. These people are clueless.
I mean, the way that the stuff is written, you read it, you're like going to pull your hair out because, as you know better than anyone, in 12 months, none of this stuff's going to make sense anyway.
Totally.
Right.
Look, the reason I have pushed for an agency-based approach for kind of like the big picture stuff and not a like write it in laws, in 12 months, it will all be written wrong. And I don't think, even if these people were like true world experts, I don't think they could get it right looking out 12 or 24 months. And these policies, which is like, we're going to look at, we're going to audit all of your source code and like look at all of your weights one by one. Like, yeah, I think there's a lot of crazy proposals out there.
By the way, especially if the models are always being retrained all the time, if they become more dynamic.
Again, this is
right,
why I think it's, But like before an airplane gets certified, there's like a set of safety tests. We put the airplane through it. And
totally,
it's different than reading all of your code.
That's reviewing the output of the model, not reviewing the insides of the model.
And so what I was going to say is that is the kind of thing that I think as safety testing makes sense.
How are we going to get that to happen, Sam? And I'm not just speaking for OpenAI, I speak for the industry, for humanity, because I am concerned that we draw ourselves into almost like a dark ages type of era by restricting the growth of these incredible technologies that can prosper, that humanity can prosper from so significantly. How do we change the sentiment and get that to happen? Because this is all moving so quickly at the government levels, and folks seem to be getting it wrong. And I'm personally concerned.
Just to build on that, Sam, the architectural decision, for example, that Llama took is pretty interesting in that it's like, we're going to let Llama grow and be as unfettered as possible. And we have this other kind of thing that we call Llama Guard that's meant to be these protective guardrails. Is that how you see the problem being solved correctly? Or do you see that
at the current strength of models, definitely some things are going to go wrong. And I don't want to like make light of those or not take those seriously, but I don't have any like catastrophic risk worries with a GPT-4 level model. And I think there's many safe ways to choose to deploy this. Maybe we'd find more common ground if we said that, and I think like, the specific example of models that are capable, that are technically capable, not even if they're not going to be used this way, of recursive self-improvement, or of, autonomously designing and deploying a bioweapon or something like that.
Or a new model.
That was the recursive self-improvement point. We should have safety testing on the outputs at an international level for models that, have a reasonable chance of posing a threat there.
All right, so you got the setup, and now you've heard Sam respond to the folks in the All In podcast about his answers to all of this stuff. What do you think? His regulatory capture answer is reasonable, except that the document and what he says are not exactly aligned with each other, at least in my mind. Maybe I'm misreading the document a little bit, but it sounds like what he wants is kind of like an FDA or an FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, or something like that. He wants a body that examines the output of these things to see if they are too powerful. But when you look at things like registering GPUs and things like that, that is different than the output. That's actually the input of these things. That's insight into the businesses and how they're working, and having the ability to turn those things off or even erase them if you disagree with that. That's really different than the FAA. The FAA can only go like, this airplane is not safe. You need to take it back to the factory, or this design is not safe, or you just crashed, like Starship did or something like that, has an explosion, you've got to do an investigation. That is a really, really different thing than saying we can go into Starbase in Texas and just basically wipe the entire thing off the map, right? That's kind of what this, having a registered GPU and the ability to delete model weights and kill things off is sort of like that. It's that ability to just kind of go like, just clean slate everything. And that's a very, very different level of control. So that's not a regulatory agency in a traditional sense. That's much more of a regulatory agency in a much more draconian kind of Orwellian sense. So while I really like Sam's answer, and if I was listening to it in isolation versus the document, I kind of can't believe it fully. And I want to believe him. He sounds honest. He reads honest. What do you think when you watch him talk? Do you read him as honest, or do you believe that he's, being duplicitous? But I read him as honest. I just have to tell you, that's my reaction to him. He seems like a good guy. Seems like somebody you could go get a beer with and he would be honest and wouldn't stab you in the back or something. But I don't know. The other really interesting part about this is he's not worried about GPT-4. And honestly, it's not that good. It's not going to, GPT-4 is not going to take over the world. Now you could use it for nefarious purposes, but that's your fault. You can use a hammer for nefarious purposes if you want to, but GPT-4 is not that good. But the sounds of it, that the sort of rumor mill is that GPT-5 or whatever they're going to call it, when it gets here, is going to be close to that good. And that's where he's actually projecting. And what he's saying is, if you have something that is able to self-replicate, in other words, if you have software that can improve itself and rewrite itself, and then improve itself and rewrite itself, and can effectively give birth to the next generation of itself, that's when things get really dangerous. And I do agree with Sam about that. He's like, that's the point at which we need to have some guardrails in place. We need to understand it. I will also give him credit for saying you don't want the government to write things into law too hard, because laws are terrible, especially in something as fast moving. The best case scenario is it will be completely useless and not do anything. The worst case scenario is it will actually kill off the industry in the US and allow other countries around the world to, accelerate past what the US is doing. And if you don't think that this is an arms race, on the level of nuclear arms, you are very much mistaken. This is absolutely that important. And that's why I think it's worth exploring this and really thinking about whether Sam Altman here is being honest, because we want him to be honest. It's important. OpenAI is one of the very few players in the world that has the opportunity to get to AGI, and from AGI to artificial superintelligence, or artificially intelligent agents, as I like to call it. It's that kind of moment that we really, really have to be careful about. And we want somebody with the best interest of not just himself and not just his company, but all of humanity in mind. And I know that that's the case with Elon Musk. I know that people disagree with me about that, but I think that he's radically honest. I want to believe that Sam Altman is that way as well, but I get the feeling that he's probably not. And quite honestly, the biggest part of my concern is that I feel like he's an honest person. And if I'm being taken in by that, that really concerns me, because if he's being duplicitous but is reading as honest, that means that we're in big trouble, because he's going to be able to do whatever he wants and think whatever he wants and tell us other things that are not aligned with what he's thinking, and we will believe him. And that's scary for somebody with this much power. So my hope is that he is being completely forthright and completely honest and open. And the Sam that we're listening to here is the actual Sam, and his real opinions and everything. And the Sam that we see in his X posts is the real Sam. I really, really hope that's the case, because if that's the case, then I will sleep better at night. But I do tend to wake up in the middle of the night wondering whether he is an honest person or whether he's being duplicitous. And again, Sam, I would love to have you on the show. I promise I will be very, very fair. Everything that I've talked about thus far is just watching recordings of you speaking, and so I haven't had a chance to interact with you myself. If I would have a chance to do that, I think I would have a much better read on you. And plus the fact, I think we would just have a good time talking about AI and the future and the visionary aspects, hopefully the very hyper-abundant world that this is leading to. So anyway, if Sam or anybody else on the OpenAI team wants to talk to me, I'd be happy to do that. Hey, Future John here. I finished editing the video, I uploaded it, I created the thumbnail, I was all happy with everything. And then of course a bunch of stuff dropped about her and Scarlett Johansson. So I'm adding this as another data point because it actually very much feeds into this whole angel or devil sort of argument here. So I'm going to start with this Sam Altman. He loves to do the cryptic kind of posts. He just posted Her. If you don't know, that of course is got to be a reference to the 2013, I believe it's about a decade old movie, Her, which is starting to feel all the time more and more real, right? It's feeling more and more like this is actually happening now. Anyway, it's got 11 million views. It was on the 13th of May, and I took a screen grab of it because I wanted to make sure, just in case somebody decided to delete this post, that I had a record of it. So from that, let's turn to an ABC News article. Of course, I will leave a link in the description so you all can take a look at that. This encapsulates a whole bunch of stuff that started on X and has accelerated rather rapidly, including a lawsuit and everything. So Scarlett Johansson reacts to OpenAI using similar voice to hers as Org pauses Sky voice. And interestingly enough, that's my grandniece. Her name is Sky. And so if you notice, when I tested OpenAI, I said a big shout out to Sky. And then of course, Sky is also the voice. So she may well grow up thinking that the AI voices are her. That's kind of a weird coincidence. I mean, she's 2, so obviously they named her before the voice, but just an interesting little coincidence there. Anyway, Scarlett Johansson is speaking out after OpenAI announced on Sunday that it would be pausing the use of an emotive voice on its newest version of ChatGPT that that sounded like the actress. So the TLDR is that OpenAI, even though they've denied that it's her voice, has paused utilizing that voice. And when you go back and listen to the original announcement, I personally didn't hear it completely, but it did sound an awful lot like her.
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for asking. How about you? How's your day going?
I'm doing great. So I would like you to function as a translator.
Perfecto.
Continuing on here, in a statement from Johansson's publicist to ABC Audio, the actress detailed how she was approached by OpenAI CEO Sam Altman to voice the ChatGPT 4.0 system, how she declined, and how she discovered that a voice on the new system sounded like her voice. Johansson said the use of a similar voice to hers on the new system shocked her and forced her to hire legal counsel. And of course, this is the US, which is litigious to the core, so it may not be necessary, but in this case, I think she might actually have a point, at least if people really do believe that it's her voice. Again, I was not convinced, but a lot of people around me thought it definitely sounded like her. But here's where things get pretty damning. Last September, I received an offer from Sam Altman, who wanted to hire me to voice the current ChatGPT 4.0 system. Johansson began in her statement. He told me that he felt by my voicing the system, I could bridge the gap between tech companies and creatives and help consumers to feel comfortable with the seismic shift concerning humans and AI. He said he felt that my voice would be comforting to people. I don't know about that. I've always found her a rather creepy movie, and the fact of the matter is that the AI at the end, by the way, spoiler alert if you haven't watched the movie in 10 years, the AI eventually leaves humanity to its own devices in the end. So it's not a particularly optimistic outcome for humanity. So I'm not positive that I would have chosen her voice even if she had said yes. I think I would have gone with something a little bit different. But that aside, Sam Altman definitely contacted her, and there's been no denial of that at all. So that is, that's just a fact to throw into the case here. Johansson said, after much consideration and for personal reasons, I declined the offer, she continued. 9 months later, my friends, family, and the general public all noted how much the newest system named Sky sounded like me. When I heard the release demo, I was shocked, angered, and in disbelief that Mr. Altman would pursue a voice that sounded so eerily similar to mine that my closest friends and news outlets could not tell the difference. Again, I don't know. I didn't hear it. I guess most people did. I didn't hear it that way. Anyway, said Johansson, who went on to say that Altman's use of the voice was, quote, intentional and a reference to her character in the 2013 film Her, in which Johansson voices the chat system Samantha. Mr. Altman even insinuated that the similarity was intentional, tweeting a single word her, which we just looked at, a reference to the film in which I voiced the chat system Samantha, who formed a relationship with a human. Johansson said, referencing Altman's May 13th message on X, formerly known as Twitter, which fueled more questions about the voice's origins. 2 days before the ChatGPT 4.0 demo was released, Mr. Altman contacted my agent asking me to reconsider before we could connect. The system was out there. So yeah, that's even worse, right? To actually ask 2 days ahead of time. It's one thing to ask and be denied and go about your own business, but then to call her back 2 days ahead of time and ask again, that makes it sound an awful lot like they intentionally found somebody who sounded just like her, and even if they didn't have her particular voice, they would have her approval. So in the public announcement, they could have said, hey, and it's voiced by Scarlett Johansson or someone similar to that, or we have a sound that's like it, or it's Scarlett Johansson approved, or whatever that kind of thing is. That would have been a nice cachet to bring along with the announcement. OpenAI, of course, wanted to have their announcement one day before Google I/O because they always like to preempt Google. They have that sort of ego battle thing going on. And so they probably should have waited an extra week and gotten back in touch with Scarlett Johansson, but they wouldn't have had so much press. And quite honestly, even this big brouhaha, what do they say? No press is bad press. So honestly, this is probably going to work out to the best for OpenAI anyway, because they'll get some more press about the whole thing. Anyway, continuing on here, as a result of their actions, I was forced to hire legal counsel who wrote 2 letters to Mr. Altman and OpenAI, setting out what they had done and asking them to detail the exact process by which they created the Sky voice, she continued. Consequently, OpenAI reluctantly agreed to take down the Sky voice. Reluctantly, I don't know. I can't answer that question, but they definitely have done that. They've put a pause on all of these things. I believe there are other voices. It was a little unclear from the demo, and I don't have a copy myself right now. But, that female voice, the weird, flirty female voice, which supposedly sounded like Scarlett Johansson, it was creepy, whatever it was. I did find it a little overly flirty and friendly and vivacious and stuff. I kind of would like my assistant to be a little bit more low-key personally. But that aside, clearly OpenAI has bowed to her wishes and taken it down. OpenAI also shared a blog post detailing how the voices for ChatGPT were chosen through an extensive process spanning 5 months involving professional voice actors, talent agencies, casting directors, and industry advisors, and how it believes that the voices should not deliberately mimic a celebrity's distinctive voice, which is odd considering that Sam Altman apparently contacted Scarlett Johansson twice about having her officially be the voice of Sky. And just turning quickly to the blog post dated May 19th, how the voices for ChatGPT were chosen, we worked with industry-leading casting and directing professionals to narrow down over 400 submissions before selecting the 5 voices. Definitely check out the link in the description. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. That's just too long for right now. Continuing with the article, it also said that Sky's voice is not an imitation of Scarlett Johansson, but belongs to a different professional actress using her own natural speaking voice. And again, I do not hear Scarlett Johansson in the voice. I hear similarity to Scarlett Johansson, not her. So I think that this statement is accurate. They did hire a person, but part of the hiring the person might be how close can you get to Scarlett Johansson? In which case, even though they're not officially taking her voice, they're getting awfully darn close by trying to mimic her voice as closely as possible. The article states OpenAI did not release the name of the actress voicing Sky, nor the other actors for the other voices of the system to protect their privacy. Johansson ended her statement by addressing the larger conversation around artificial intelligence and privacy as a whole, and I think this is actually quite useful at this point. In a time where we are all grappling with deep fakes and the protection of our own likeness, our own work, our own identities, I believe these are questions that deserve absolute clarity, she said. I look forward to resolution in the form of transparency and the passage of appropriate legislation. No, please God, no legislation. We can have some sort of approval process or something. I've already talked about that in the rest of the video. But legislation in a fast-changing industry is just death. That will not work at all. Anyway, passage of appropriate legislation to help ensure that the individual rights are protected. In response to Johansson's statement, Altman released his own saying OpenAI is, quote, sorry they didn't communicate better. The voice of Sky is not Scarlett Johansson's and it was never intended to resemble hers. We cast the voice actor behind Sky's voice before any outreach to Miss Johansson. Out of respect for Miss Johansson, we have paused using Sky's voice on our products, he added. We are sorry to Miss Johansson that we didn't communicate better. So again, just as with the rest of the video that I recorded yesterday, we have this balancing thing. Are they in the right? Are they in the wrong? It sounds like what they did was they did a casting call. They cast her voice. More than likely, this person is going to come out and we're going to find out who Sky's voice is. Now, unfortunately, that she's not going to actually be used for the product. But on the other hand, OpenAI clearly reached out to Scarlett Johansson. They clearly wanted her to be part of this. They clearly wanted the voice to sound very, very similar to her because of the connection to her. So the intent was clearly to try to attach Sky, the vocal system in OpenAI going forward, to something that we humans were comfortable with because we already saw an example of this a decade in movies and it's part of the cultural, zeitgeist at this point. And thus something that we're familiar with and that we're like, okay, yeah, I've heard AI speak in voices like this before, and it's cool. So regardless of whether you think that's a good or a bad idea, that's clearly what OpenAI was going for here. So we're stuck in a situation here where we have a voice actress that was likely not Scarlett Johansson, but at the same time, we also have a voice actress that was selected to sound very, very similar to her. And OpenAI had reached out to Scarlett Johansson and she had rejected them. So what they probably should have done was, gone back. This was months ago, right? They could have gone back and recast that particular actress's voice to sound different enough that it was obvious it was not Scarlett Johansson. This is something that they should have done back when Scarlett Johansson originally said no, but they didn't, and then they got themselves into this situation. So again, this is one more data point, and now back to the originally recorded video. In the meantime, give me your opinion about Sam. I'm going to hold it in abeyance until I have more evidence. Let me know what you think in the comments. And while you're down there, if you don't mind liking and subscribing, that really helps out the channel. Thank you so much. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.